The first thing I noticed at my grandmother's funeral wasn't the somber faces or the scent of lilies. It was Karen. You know the type. Perfectly coiffed hair, diamond studs catching the sunlight, voice dripping with entitlement. She stormed up the aisle in her pastel pantsuit like she owned the place and pointed directly at me. "Where's the will?" she shouted. The entire church went silent. My uncle choked on a sob. The minister blinked twice, unsure whether to intervene. And there I was, clutching a single white rose, feeling like a deer caught in headlights. The audacity stunned me. Karen, who hadn't spoken to my grandmother in over a decade, dared to demand legal documents at a funeral. The kind of person who believed that proximity to tragedy entitled her to everything. I wanted to laugh, cry, and throw the rose at her all at once. But then my grandmother's lawyer cleared his throat, and Karen's eyes flicked to him. "Oh, this isn't over," she hissed, as if she were promising some sort of karmic retribution. Little did she know, she had just stepped into a storm she couldn't even imagine. You see, my grandmother didn't just leave me a house or a savings account. She left me 900 acres of sprawling, untouched land, complete with crumbling farmhouse, dense woods, and a river that shimmered like molten silver under the sun. And she'd set it up legally, immaculately, in my name. Karen had no idea what she was up against. She thought a loud voice and a dramatic flair would intimidate me. But I had something stronger than entitlement, lawsuits, or HOA bylaws on my side. My grandmother's careful planning, her quiet wisdom, and a will that would make even the savviest lawyers blink. By the time the service ended, Karen had stumped out, muttering something about, "This isn't the end." Meanwhile, I stared at the forested expanse ahead of me and whispered a promise I didn't fully understand yet. I'm going to turn this land into something unforgettable. The next morning, I drove up the winding dirt road to the property. My grandmother's old farmhouse appeared like a ghost from another era, its windows staring blankly at me, paint peeling and porch board sagging. A soft wind rustled through the tall pine trees, carrying with it the smell of wet earth and history. Every step I took felt like stepping deeper into her legacy. I unlocked the gate with a key my grandmother had given me years ago, the one she had insisted I always keep close. As I walked the property, I began to understand the scale of what she had left me. 900 acres of land untouched by developers, untouched by the petty squabbles of neighbors. Or so I thought. There were fields that stretched for miles, a river with clear, cold water, dense with hiding deer, foxes, and perhaps secrets my grandmother had never spoken of. Then came the first sign of trouble. The HOA had already sent a notice, a crisp, official-looking letter demanding I pay community maintenance fees and threatening fines if I didn't comply. The irony was sharp. My grandmother's land was technically outside the HOA jurisdiction, but Karen had managed to twist some obscure clause into a weapon. The letter made me laugh. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket. Karen wouldn't get the satisfaction of seeing me panic. Not today. Not ever. I spent the afternoon exploring, finding hidden paths, an overgrown orchard, and the barn that smelled of hay and forgotten memories. It was in that barn I found something my grandmother had left for me specifically, a small, leather-bound journal tucked under a loose floorboard. Her handwriting was unmistakable, looping, elegant, and deliberate. Inside, she had written instructions, not just about the land, but about Karen, the HOA, and how to protect her legacy. According to the journal, Karen had always been trouble, manipulative, opportunistic, and willing to lie, cheat, or bully to get what she wanted. My grandmother had anticipated every move, every tantrum, every legal loophole she might try to exploit. The land wasn't just a gift. It was a puzzle, a challenge, and a fortress all in one. I leaned back against the barn wall and realized something. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about respect, justice, and proving that cunning and entitlement couldn't beat careful planning and integrity. My grandmother had trusted me to see this through, and I wouldn't let her down. That evening, I lit a small fire in the fireplace of the farmhouse. Dust danced in the golden light as I made plans. First, I would secure the property, fences, signs, legal papers. Then, I would make the land work for me, not the HOA or Karen. And finally, I would expose Karen's schemes for what they were, desperate, petty, and doomed to fail. I didn't sleep much that night. I could hear the wind through the trees, like whispers of encouragement, or warnings. Somewhere out there, Karen was plotting, imagining I would crumble at the first sign of conflict. But she didn't know me, and more importantly, she didn't know my grandmother. The next morning, the sun hit the river like liquid gold. I took a deep breath, tasting the freedom of owning land so vast, so full of potential. Somewhere beyond the trees, Karen probably thought she was one step ahead. But little did she know, her drama, her shouting, and her threats were just the opening act. The real story, the one that would define who inherited everything, was about to begin. And as I looked over the rolling fields, the dense forest, and the shimmering river, I smiled. This wasn't just inheritance. This was destiny. The next morning, the sun rose over the property like a golden promise, but the peace didn't last long. Before I had even finished my first cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a flurry of messages. The first one was from my lawyer. "You've got an HOA complaint." Karen filed it herself. She's claiming an authorized use of land and demanding immediate hearings. I stayed at the screen, blinking. An authorized use of land? This wasn't even her turf. She couldn't touch a single acre legally, yet here she was, trying to turn the HOA into a personal army. And that was Karen in a nutshell. Loud, persistent, and utterly convinced that volume could substitute for logic. I decided to confront the problem head-on. I drove down the winding road to the HOA office, a small brick building with a parking lot full of minivans and SUVs. Inside, a woman behind the counter looked me up and down as if I were an intruder. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, producing a copy of my grandmother's will and the property deed. "I own 900 acres. Karen Thompson here," I gestured vaguely, "is making false claims about my land. I need these resolved immediately." The woman's eyes flicked to the papers, then back at me. "Oh, well," she's very persistent. She's vocal about her concerns. I clenched my jaw. That's when I realized this wasn't just going to be a legal battle. This was going to be a psychological one, too. Karen had allies in the HOA, neighbors who whispered behind curtains and doors, and a sense of entitlement that made her fearless. Returning to the farmhouse, I decided to focus on what I could control. I walked the property with a journal tucked under my arm. My grandmother's handwriting guided me. The land has memory. Treat it with respect, and it will reveal itself to you. Karen will fail because she does not listen to history. I didn't fully understand what she meant yet, but I felt a shiver of anticipation. There was something hidden in this land, something she had left me beyond the trees, the river, and the fields. Something that would give me leverage over Karen, and perhaps keep her at bay forever. That afternoon, I met with Mr. Hawkins, the neighbor who had been on the property the longest. His hands were callous from decades of tending his small farm, and his eyes were sharp, like he had seen 100 seasons of trouble. "Ah, so Karen started her little parade. Hey," he said, shaking his head, "don't let her rattle you. She's all bark and no bite, unless you let her in. Your grandmother, she always knew what she was doing." "I hope so," I said. "She's filing complaints, talking to neighbors, claiming I'm breaking HOA rules I didn't even know existed." Mr. Hawkins chuckled. "Rules are like water. They bend to the strong and drown the weak. Don't let her drown you. Follow the land. Trust it. Your grandmother left you more than deeds and fences. She left you wisdom." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. With allies like him, maybe I could withstand Karen's storm. Over the next week, the HOA attacks escalated. Karen sent letters demanding inspections, fines, and community meetings to decide the fate of my land. She even tried to rally neighbors, painting me as a rogue outsider who didn't care about the neighborhood. Some neighbors were gullible, whispering as I walked past. Others avoided me, clearly afraid of Karen's wrath. I kept my focus on the land, walking the paths my grandmother had marked, exploring every stream, hill, and grove. It was during one of these walks that I stumbled upon it, a hidden clearing at the edge of the forest, where the sunlight hit the ground in golden shafts, illuminating a small stone marker almost swallowed by moss. Etched into it was a symbol I didn't recognize, but instinct told me it was important. I checked the journal. My grandmother had written, "The land remembers those who listen. Seek the marker. The rest will follow." Goosebumps rose on my arms. I had no idea what the rest meant, but I felt closer to my grandmother in that moment than I had at the funeral. This land wasn't just earth and trees. It was alive with secrets, protections, and stories waiting for me to discover. Karen, of course, had no idea. Her energy was focused entirely on legal and social sabotage. She didn't listen to the land. She didn't respect it. And in her arrogance, she was blind to the fact that she had already lost the first battle. By the second week, Karen took things further. She organized a town hall, inviting neighbors to discuss the future of the property. Flyers appeared on doors, emails flooded in boxes, and suddenly I was a villain in a story I hadn't written. I decided to attend, not to argue, but to observe. Karen strutted to the front, her heels clicking like a warning drumbeat, and launched into a speech about responsibility, community, and proper stewardship. Her words were smooth, practiced, and poisonous. Then it was my turn. I stood, holding the journal, and spoke quietly but firmly. I didn't shout. I didn't gesticulate wildly. I simply told the story of my grandmother, how she loved this land, how she protected it from outsiders, and how she had left it to me with care and precision. I showed them the deed. I showed them letters, plans, and excerpts from the journal. And as I spoke, I noticed a subtle shift. Neighbors who had been hesitant leaned forward. Others who had been ready to side with Karen frowned, realizing that she had been spinning tales without facts. Karen's face tightened. She tried to interrupt, but the moderator, a woman with more backbone than I expected, cut her off. "Order," she said. "The evidence speaks for itself." By the end of the meeting, Karen left fuming, muttering about tricks and manipulation. Meanwhile, a few neighbors came up to me, shaking hands, apologizing for doubting me, and offering help. The first skirmish was over, but I knew the war had just begun. Karen wasn't going to give up. She thrived on chaos, and she had a long memory. That night, I returned to the clearing and examined the stone marker more closely. Beneath the moss, there was a small compartment, just large enough for a hand. I reached inside and pulled out a rolled parchment. The handwriting was unmistakable, my grandmother's. It wasn't a map. It was a series of instructions, strange and cryptic, about the land, its features, and a legacy that went beyond money. There were notes about hidden water sources, areas of wildlife protection, and hints of something buried deep in the forest, something that could ensure the property's security for generations. I felt a thrill. Karen could scream, sue, and manipulate all she wanted, but she had no idea what the land truly held, and neither did anyone else. The fight wasn't just legal. It wasn't just social. It was going to be about knowledge, patience, and listening to the land itself. My grandmother had set it up this way for a reason, and if I played it right, Karen wouldn't just lose, she would be completely blindsided. I tucked the parchment into my jacket and walked back to the farmhouse. The moonlight reflected off the river, silver and serene, as if acknowledging that the first round had gone in my favor. Karen had her army, her complaints, and her fury, but I had something stronger, the wisdom of a woman who had spent decades shaping a legacy no entitled person could ever break. And deep in my heart, I realized the truth. This wasn't just inheritance. This was a battlefield, and I was finally ready to fight. By the third week, Karen's attacks had evolved from annoying letters and town hall theatrics to something far more insidious. It started with small things, a broken fence post here, some tire tracks through the orchard there. At first, I thought it was weather or careless neighbors. But when I discovered that the water pump in the barn had been tampered with, wires cut, valves twisted, I realized that Karen wasn't just trying to bully me socially. She was trying to sabotage me physically, to make me lose control of the property. I called Mr. Hawkins immediately. "Karen," he said after listening to my description, "no doubt about it. She's testing you, trying to see how much you'll tolerate. But you've got something she'll never understand, your grandmother's foresight. She planned for exactly this." His confidence was reassuring, but the truth was unsettling. Karen's attacks were escalating faster than I could respond. And worse, some neighbors were starting to whisper behind my back again. Fear spreads quickly in small towns, and Karen was a master of planting it. Determined to stay ahead, I decided to double down on exploring the land. The parchment I had discovered under the stone marker called out to me every time I walked the forested trails. My grandmother's handwriting guided me to locations that seemed ordinary at first glance, but each had a hidden function: a natural spring she had dammed subtly to ensure clean water, a grove she had cleared to attract game, even a hollow tree that concealed tools and supplies. It was then that I noticed a faint trail I hadn't seen before. It wound deep into the forest, almost like the trees themselves were trying to hide it. I followed it carefully, making notes in my journal. Hours passed, and I finally emerged at a hidden clearing. The sunlight poured over a small stone pedestal with a metal box embedded into it. My grandmother had left instructions for me to unlock it using a sequence of symbols from the parchment. Hands trembling, I worked through the sequence. A soft click echoed through the clearing, and the lid opened to reveal a cache of papers, old photographs, and an iron key with a strange emblem etched on it. The papers detailed portions of the land I had never known existed: a secret orchard, a collapsed cellar, and instructions for managing a part of the forest that had been protected for generations. I realized then that my grandmother had thought about everything: Karen's entitlement, the HOA, and even potential thieves. She had left me the tools to defend this land, not just legally, but strategically. And if I learned to listen to the land and her guidance, Karen wouldn't just fail, she would be humiliated. The next morning, Karen returned, this time with reinforcements. Or so it seemed. The HOA sent inspectors who arrived with clipboards and cameras, claiming to check community compliance. I knew this was just a ploy to intimidate me and find a technicality they could exploit. I met them at the property line. Calmly, I showed them the deed, explained the boundaries, and pointed out areas that were clearly under my control. Some of the inspectors seemed taken aback. They hadn't expected someone so prepared, so composed. Karen, on the other hand, was furious. Her face was red, her hands shaking as she tried to argue, but without legal footing, there was nothing she could do. By the time they left, I had gained a small victory, but Karen's fury had grown, and with it came recklessness. That afternoon, I found tire tracks again, this time leading toward the barn. Whoever had driven through wasn't subtle. They had flattened a portion of the orchard I had started to tend, leaving saplings broken and soil churned. I clenched my fists and took a deep breath. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was an attack on something I loved, and I wouldn't let Karen's arrogance destroy it. I decided to fight back, but not with anger. I used strategy. The key I had found in the hidden cache became my first weapon. It unlocked an old shed behind the farmhouse that I hadn't noticed before. Inside, I discovered a set of tools, spare fencing, and even a cache of seeds, everything needed to restore the orchard and repair the barn's damages. My grandmother had anticipated the worst and prepared me for it. Over the next few days, I worked tirelessly, repairing fences, replanting trees, and reinforcing the water pump. Every action felt like a small victory, but I knew Karen wouldn't stop. She thrived on chaos, on the perception that she could control everything. And if she sensed she was losing, she would escalate further. It was then that I noticed another subtle sign, a series of footprints leading toward the hidden clearing I had discovered. They weren't animal tracks. Someone had been there, observing, maybe even following my movements. My heart raced. Could it be Karen herself? Or one of her allies from the HOA? Whoever it was, they didn't know the land the way I now did. They couldn't, and that was the advantage I intended to exploit. Late one evening, I returned to the clearing with a metal box. Using the instructions on the parchment, I began to explore the deeper mysteries of the land. There were mentions of hidden water caches, underground storage, and even protective traps for intruders. Ingenious, subtle defenses designed to protect resources without causing harm. My grandmother had thought of everything, and every step I took revealed another layer of her planning. By the time the moon rose, I had mapped the land in my mind. Every stream, hill, and grove had a purpose. Every hidden nook could be used strategically to safeguard the property. And with each discovery, I felt closer to my grandmother than I had ever been. Karen, no matter how loud, could never understand this. She had never listened. She had never walked the land, studied its features, or respected its history. Her entitlement blinded her, and that would be her downfall. But Karen wasn't the type to give up easily. The next morning, a threatening letter appeared, slipped under the farmhouse door. Stop meddling. The HOA will force you off this land if you continue. Give up before it's too late. I read it calmly, then tucked it into the journal. My grandmother's words echoed in my mind. The land has memory. Treat it with respect, and it will reveal itself to you. Those who seek to destroy it will fail. I smiled. Karen could threaten, scream, and manipulate, but she didn't understand what this land represented. She didn't understand the legacy, and she certainly didn't understand me. For the first time, I felt the true weight of my inheritance, not just the acres of land, but the knowledge, strategy, and foresight my grandmother had given me. Karen's HOA games were small in comparison to the power hidden beneath the soil, rivers, and trees. And if I played it right, she would lose not just a battle, but her credibility and influence forever. I looked out over the land as the sun dipped behind the trees. The river shimmered, the orchard was being repaired, and the forest whispered secrets only I could hear. This wasn't just a property. This was a fortress, a living entity, and a legacy that Karen could never touch. And in that moment, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next time Karen tried to strike, she wouldn't just fail. She would be blindsided by a land that had been waiting patiently for me to claim it. By the fourth week, it was clear Karen had moved past petty harassment. Her HOA tactics had failed. Her neighbors were starting to question her credibility, and her fury was boiling over. I could feel it in every phone call, every email, and every whispered conversation I overheard when walking the land. That morning, I found a fresh tire track cutting through the orchard again, but this time, there was something more sinister. Broken branches, disturbed soil, and small, sharp rocks deliberately scattered along the paths. Whoever had done this was no longer just trying to intimidate me. They wanted to hurt the land, to destabilize it, to make me fail. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the journal. My grandmother had foreseen more than just legal battles or petty HOA complaints. She had prepared for people like Karen, people who thrived on destruction and entitlement. I decided it was time to escalate, not in anger, but in strategy. The first step was securing the property. Using the metal key I had discovered in the hidden stone pedestal, I unlocked the shed behind the farmhouse. Inside, I found old tools, fencing supplies, and even blueprints my grandmother had left, detailing hidden paths, secret gates, and natural barriers. Every inch of the land had been considered, every vulnerable point accounted for. I set to work, reinforcing the orchard, repairing the barn, and carefully installing subtle defenses. Not traps that would hurt anyone. My grandmother had been clear on that. But deterrence. Hidden barriers, carefully positioned thorn bushes, and pathways that led intruders into dead ends. As I worked, I felt a growing sense of control. Karen could shout, she could threaten, but she didn't understand this land. She had no idea that I could turn every hill, tree, and riverbank into an advantage. Karen's next move was audacious. She organized another town hall, claiming she had evidence of my mismanagement and threatening to take legal action to seize control. But this time, I was ready. I brought photographs, maps, and excerpts from the journal, showing not only that the land was in perfect condition, but that it had features Karen had no knowledge of. During her speech, she tried to sway the neighbors, using fear and false claims. But as she spoke, I noticed their faces, skeptical, confused, and increasingly unwilling to be manipulated. Her confidence began to crack, her words losing their venom. By the time I responded calmly and clearly, showing the strategic planning my grandmother had left, Karen's arguments sounded hollow and desperate. After the meeting, a few neighbors approached me privately, apologizing for doubting me and offering assistance. Karen's influence was shrinking, and I realized something vital. She wasn't just fighting for control of the land. She was fighting for the illusion of power. Once that illusion crumbled, she had nothing left. Later that evening, I returned to the hidden clearing to study the metal box and parchment again. There was more to discover. Notes about underground water channels, a natural reservoir hidden beneath the forest floor, and even a concealed cellar that could store supplies for months. My grandmother's planning was meticulous, brilliant, and entirely designed to keep the property and its new owner safe from people like Karen. I also found a small collection of letters addressed to me, written in her calm, precise handwriting. They weren't just instructions, they were lessons. People like Karen are loud, but they lack vision, she had written. They will exhaust themselves trying to control what they do not understand. Listen to the land. It will guide you. I felt a surge of determination. Karen had underestimated me. She had underestimated the land. And most importantly, she had underestimated my grandmother. The next morning, a small group of Karen's allies from the HOA arrived unannounced, trying to inspect the land again. This time, I didn't confront them aggressively. Instead, I guided them along the paths my grandmother had prepared, subtly demonstrating the boundaries, the water sources, and the orchard's careful management. By the time they left, they were convinced and a little intimidated by the depth of planning that went into the property. Karen, of course, was furious. I could feel her tension radiating from the messages she sent, accusatory, frantic, almost unhinged. She demanded meetings, inspections, and even attempted to rally other neighbors into her orbit again. But by now, her credibility was waning. People were starting to see her not as a concerned community member, but as a desperate, entitled antagonist. That night, I explored another secret feature of the land. Following the instructions from the parchment, I discovered a concealed cellar beneath the old barn. It wasn't large, but it was perfectly designed to store tools, seeds, and even preserve food. There were hidden compartments and locks, all meant to protect resources from intruders or opportunists like Karen. As I descended into the cellar, I realized something important. This land wasn't just inherited. It was alive, in a sense. It had defenses, it had protections, and it had knowledge embedded in every hill and stream. My grandmother had created a legacy that extended beyond money or property. It was a living testament to foresight, care, and intelligence. Karen couldn't touch that. She never could. The real turning point came unexpectedly. A neighbor, one who had been neutral, watching Karen's chaos unfold, approached me with a confession. "I think I know what your grandmother was protecting," he said. "There's a part of the land people don't even talk about, a grove she kept off limits. You need to see it." Following his directions, I hiked deep into the forest, moving past familiar trails and into untouched wilderness. Sunlight filtered through dense leaves, birds scattered in alarm, and the air was thick with the smell of pine and earth. Then I saw it, a grove of trees unlike any I had seen before. Their branches intertwined, creating natural arches, and in the center, a small pond reflected the sky perfectly. It was breathtaking, and hidden beneath the surface of the pond, I could see the glint of something metallic. My grandmother had written vaguely about a treasure for protection and preservation, and I realized this must be it. Carefully, I waded into the pond and retrieved a small, waterproof chest. Inside were old coins, heirlooms, and legal documents, proof of additional land rights and assets that Karen had no knowledge of. This was a final piece of my grandmother's plan, an unassailable advantage, hidden in plain sight, ready to be used if anyone tried to challenge the inheritance. By the time I returned to the farmhouse, the sun had set. The land stretched around me, calm and steady, as if acknowledging that the first major battle had been won. Karen's schemes were collapsing. Her allies were wavering, and I had discovered the full measure of the power my grandmother had entrusted to me. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of security, not just because of legal protections or hidden treasures, but because I had earned it. I had listened to the land, followed my grandmother's guidance, and begun to understand the subtle, layered defenses she had built. Karen could scream, threaten, and manipulate all she wanted, but she was fighting a battle she could never win. And deep in my heart, I knew the final act was approaching. Karen's desperation would lead her to one final gamble, and I was ready to meet it, armed with a legacy of 900 acres, a hidden treasure, and a strategy that no entitled antagonist could ever anticipate. By the 5th week, Karen's desperation had reached a fever pitch. She was no longer sending polite letters or leveraging HOA rules. Her attacks had become aggressive, brazen, and, frankly, reckless. Late one evening, I received a message that chilled me. "I'm coming to take what's mine. Tonight." I didn't panic. Instead, I smiled. I had anticipated this. My grandmother's foresight was brilliant for precisely the scenario. The moment the entitled stormed forward, the land itself could act as both shield and guide. I spent the day preparing, revisiting the hidden cellar beneath the barn and the grove with the pond. Everything was in place: barriers, paths, and hidden routes that Karen had no knowledge of. I checked the orchard and reinforced the fences. By nightfall, the property was as secure as it could be, and I was ready. Around 10 p.m., headlights appeared at the edge of the driveway. Karen's car rolled slowly toward the farmhouse, a determined glare visible even in the darkness. She wasn't alone. 2 other HOA allies were with her, holding flashlights and clipboards as if those would lend authority to their invasion. I watched from the barn window, heart steady. Karen had assumed she could intimidate me in the dark. She had assumed that aggression could win where entitlement failed. But she had overlooked one crucial fact. She didn't know the land. She didn't know the paths, the hidden obstacles, the natural defenses my grandmother had left. As Karen and her accomplices stepped onto the property, they didn't realize they were entering a maze. I had subtly redirected the gates, covered familiar paths with foliage, and ensured that only I knew the true safe routes. Within minutes, the flashlights were bouncing over branches, tripping over hidden roots, and tangling in thorny underbrush. I could hear their frustrated voices echoing through the night. "Where is it? Where's the entrance?" Karen hissed, her usual confidence cracking. "Maybe it's back here," one of her allies muttered, stepping into a small ditch cleverly disguised as level ground. A sharp yelp followed, and I suppressed a laugh. Using the secret paths mapped in my mind, I moved silently through the forest, observing the chaos unfold. Karen's group was completely disoriented. I realized this was exactly how my grandmother had envisioned it, her land itself acting as a guardian, confusing intruders while guiding me safely. I reached the grove with the pond, the hidden chest safely stashed beneath the water's surface. Karen had no idea it existed. She couldn't imagine the treasure, the documents, or the strategic advantages hidden in plain sight. And when she finally realized she had been outmaneuvered, it would be too late. I returned to the farmhouse, calmly waiting as Karen and her allies wandered through the property. Their anger escalated with each misstep. Every broken step, every tangled flashlight, every frustrated shout reinforced the truth. Entitlement cannot overcome preparation. Hours later, exhausted and humiliated, Karen finally emerged from the forest in a small clearing near the orchard. Her face was streaked with mud and frustration. "This isn't over," she screamed, but her voice sounded weak, even to her. The neighbors who had come to check the property were watching silently, their earlier skepticism replaced by quiet support for me. I stepped forward calmly. "It is over," I said. "You can't force control over something you don't understand. You can't bully what protected by foresight, knowledge, and history. This land isn't yours, and it never will be." Karen's face twisted, a mixture of rage and disbelief. She had assumed that aggression, loud threats, and HOA leverage could secure what she wanted. She hadn't anticipated strategy, patience, or wisdom, and now she was paying the price. The final blow came unexpectedly. Remember the documents I had discovered in the hidden chest? Among them were legal papers proving additional land rights, water access, and assets tied to the property. Proof that any attempt to seize the land would not only fail but also expose Karen's baseless claims. I produced them, calmly explaining the hidden advantages my grandmother had left. Her allies shifted uneasily. They hadn't expected the property to be so thoroughly protected. Karen's arguments evaporated under the weight of evidence. For the first time, she realized that her entire campaign of intimidation had been not just futile, but utterly pointless. "This isn't fair," she stammered, her voice cracking. I smiled. "Fairness isn't measured by shouting or entitlement. It's measured by preparation, integrity, and respect. That's what my grandmother taught me, and that's why I inherited this land, while you have nothing." By dawn, Karen had left, dragging her ego behind her. The HOA complaints, the threats, and the endless letters suddenly seemed hollow. I walked through the property in the early morning light, the river shimmering, the orchard repaired, and the forest calm. The land had endured her attack, and so had I. It was more than just a victory. It was a revelation. My grandmother's foresight, combined with my understanding of the land, had turned what could have been a nightmare into a triumph. I realized that inheritance wasn't just about ownership. It was about responsibility, strategy, and honoring the vision of those who came before. The neighbors who had once doubted me began stopping by, offering help and congratulations. Even those who had supported Karen quietly stepped back, recognizing that the battle was over and the rightful heir had claimed the property. That evening, I returned to the hidden grove one last time. I removed the chest from beneath the pond and opened it, taking out the final documents. They weren't just legal protections. There were lessons, maps, and instruction for the future. My grandmother had trusted me not just with land, but with wisdom. As I looked around the grove, the trees arching over me like guardians, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Karen's drama, the HOA conflicts, and the late-night sabotage attempts all seemed distant now, insignificant compared to the legacy I had inherited. The land, alive with history and strategy, had guided me, protected me, and proven itself more powerful than any entitlement or threat. I knew the battles weren't over. There would always be challenges, neighbors with grudges, or opportunists like Karen. But I also knew that this land, with its hidden secrets, its careful design, and the wisdom of my grandmother, would always give me the upper hand. And as the sun set behind the hills, casting golden light over the river, orchard, and forest, I whispered to the land, and to my grandmother's memory, we did it. We won. And now, it's time to build something lasting, something that no one can ever take away. The morning after Karen's final failed attempt, the air felt different. The birds sang more clearly, the river glittered in the sunlight, and even the orchard seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The land itself had survived the storm, and I had survived Karen's relentless attacks. But this was more than just a personal victory. It was a culmination of decades of foresight, patience, and careful planning. I began the day by walking the property's full length, inspecting every fence, path, and grove. Nothing had been overlooked. Every hidden root, every stone marker, every precaution my grandmother had left had proven invaluable. It was incredible to see how she had anticipated not just legal challenges, but human nature itself. Karen had been loud, aggressive, and entitled, but she had underestimated wisdom, strategy, and the subtle power of the land. As I walked toward the barn, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the HOA. Karen Thompson has resigned all claims. All complaints withdrawn. Effective immediately. I blinked, reading it twice. The formal language couldn't mask the fact. Karen had lost everything. Her screaming, her letters, her public theatrics, they hadn't worked. She had gambled, underestimated the land, and now her influence was gone. Later that afternoon, a few neighbors came by, offering congratulations and, in some cases, apologies. I realized that the battle wasn't just about legal ownership. It had been about trust, respect, and proving that entitlement and bullying could not dictate outcomes. People had seen Karen's tactics for what they were, and they now recognized the care, foresight, and intelligence behind the inheritance. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Delaney, smiled as she handed me a basket of freshly baked bread. "You've done your grandmother proud," she said. "And more importantly, you've proven that integrity and patience when where anger and greed fail." Her words struck a chord. This wasn't just about me. It was about continuing a legacy of thoughtful stewardship. My grandmother hadn't just left me land. She had left me responsibility, knowledge, and a blueprint for leadership. That evening, I returned to the hidden grove. The pond shimmered under the sunset, golden light reflecting off the water like molten metal. I retrieved the metal chest and carefully placed the legal documents, coins, and heirlooms inside the farmhouse's secure safe. This was more than protection. It was symbolic. The land, the treasures, and the legacy were now safely in my care. As I sat by the grove, I reflected on the journey. Karen had been loud and aggressive, but she had been predictable. Her strength was her arrogance, and her weakness was her inability to listen. My grandmother had known this. Every hidden trail, every secret clearing, every defensive measure had been designed to neutralize people like her. And it had worked. I realized that the true power of inheritance wasn't wealth. It was knowledge, preparation, and understanding the deeper value of what had been entrusted to me. The land itself was alive, in a sense, and it had guided me, protected me, and rewarded my patience. Over the next few weeks, I focused on restoration and development. The orchard flourished, the barn was repaired, and pathways were cleared and mapped for easy navigation. But I didn't stop there. I began creating small areas for wildlife, planting native trees, and establishing zones for natural preservation. My grandmother had wanted the land to be sustainable, to thrive, and to teach future generations about care and foresight. News of Karen's downfall spread quietly through the town. Neighbors who had once whispered now approached openly, offering support and assistance. The HOA itself began to reconsider its approach, realizing that intimidation and bureaucracy could not override legitimate ownership and responsible stewardship. I even hosted small gatherings, teaching neighbors about the history of the land, my grandmother's strategies, and the lessons hidden in every grove, stream, and orchard. Karen, of course, disappeared from the property and the neighborhood entirely. She had nothing left, no credibility, no allies, no influence. She had gambled everything and lost because she had ignored the most important lesson. Knowledge and preparation always outweigh entitlement. One morning, as I walked along the riverbank, I paused to watch the water ripple over stones. I thought about my grandmother, about the journal, the hidden markers, and the metal chest. Every challenge, every sabotage attempt, every late-night threat had been anticipated. She had given me the tools not just to defend the property, but to understand it deeply, to treat it with respect, and to ensure its longevity. I knelt by the water and whispered a quiet thanks. "We did it," I said softly. "I understand now. Everything you planned. It worked. I'll honor it." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment it felt as if she were answering back, her presence embedded in every branch, every stone, and every ripple of the river. Months later, the land had transformed. The orchard was lush and productive. The barn was functional, with hidden storage and secure spaces. Paths wound through the forest, marked subtly so that only those who truly understood the land could navigate safely. Wildlife had returned to the groves, and neighbors now approached with respect rather than suspicion. I had become not just the owner, but the steward. My grandmother's foresight had guided me through every challenge, and Karen's attempt had only reinforced the value of patience, strategy, and understanding. Looking back, I realized the inheritance had been about far more than land. It had been about wisdom, resilience, and the power of careful planning. Karen had thought she could take everything with noise and aggression, but the land, and my grandmother's legacy, had protected what was rightfully mine. And in that quiet, golden moment, surrounded by orchards, river, and forest, I knew the truth. Some inheritances are measured not in acres, money, or possessions, but in the foresight, strategy, and care that allow a legacy to endure. Karen had lost everything. I had gained far more than land. I had gained understanding, wisdom, and a living testament to the power of foresight. The 900 acres stretched endlessly before me, alive, thriving, and secure. And I finally understood what my grandmother had always known. The land remembers those who listen, protects those who respect it, and rewards those who are patient and prepared. And that legacy, I would protect it, nurture it, and honor it forever.